So let's talk about communication and why that needs to be a priority, right? And one of the things I wanted to initially talk about is the difference between speech and communication, because a lot of times our focus is on speech, right? Because that is our method of communication, just as if you had a kiddo that was born hearing impaired or significantly hearing impaired or deaf, and sign language was going to be their primary method. Your expectation initially as a parent is you're going to communicate with your child verbally, right? So you're looking for that. You are expecting that to happen. But the reality is that that child needs a different way to communicate. So for a lot of our autistic kiddos, they communicate differently. That's a whole nother webinar. But what I want you to understand, those of you who are listening, is it is critical for our children to have a method of communication. And relying on speech is not always available. Even for autistic adults who are verbal communicators, relying on speech is not always accessible. So what I wanted to help you sort of understand to facilitate all of you making communication a priority is, what is the difference between speech and communication? What do I look for as a parent? Speech is simply verbal communication, right? Can be used different ways, right? You are speaking, you can give a speech, the computer is speaking, Alexa is speaking, I don't want to say her name too loud. But most of the time we are looking for the speech as a method of communication when our kids are little. And then whether we get a diagnosis or we have a delay in communication development, we still push for that speech, right? Your child typically goes to speech therapy, they're working on speech, and that's all great, right? It's wonderful. However, we do know that that takes motor planning, word finding, it takes having sensory regulation, it takes being able to articulate, right? And all of that is what we need to do, amongst other things, in order to communicate, right? For me to say all of this, everything is connecting very quickly, efficiently, and I'm able to verbalize and communicate in this way. However, when I'm typing, I have to work a little harder, right? Like my thought process. That's why I am that person when someone sends text messages and we're going back and forth, I'm the one that will say, let's just call, right? Because I'm such a verbal processor. And it's easier for me to communicate verbally. I have to work harder at doing the typing. The other part is I tend to over edit. I overthink when I type or text, and I keep making edits. So that is something that I know about myself, right? We're trying to figure our kiddos out when they're little, right? What really works best for them. But what we do know oftentimes is sometimes that speech is not efficient. It's not reliable. It's not predictable. It's not consistent. So our kids get frustrated and they go into a meltdown, and you're frustrated as a parent because you don't know what your kiddo wants or needs. So that's where we need to move into thinking about communication. Communication looks different for each person, right? Some folks are verbal communicators. Most of us are verbal communicators. Some folks don't like to verbally communicate as much as others, but the majority of us in general, right, are verbal communicators. So we're expecting that from everyone. However, sometimes our brain works differently. Sometimes we have to work on some strategies in order to develop that verbal communication, but that doesn't mean we can't have other ways to communicate. And that is where I think it's important for parents to make communication a priority, right? It's great if a child can sit. If they can't communicate, what's the point? And they don't need to sit to learn to communicate. I will repeat that. They don't need to sit to learn to communicate. As a speech therapist, I don't sit at a table with kids. When I go into homes, I don't sit at a table. I'm on the floor, I'm moving, I'm outside. That's where I communicate. I don't sit at a table all day unless I'm at school. right? So communication is not at a table. That's not the, unless you're out to dinner or at a family meeting, you typically don't sit in your living room at a table for a discussion. You hang out, you walk, you're playing, you're interacting, you're cooking, you're doing things, you're communicating. So we need to remember our kiddos need to have that immersed in that environment, and some of our kiddos need a little bit support, right? So when we think about communication, that support can be visuals, 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 visuals. You can have visual pictures. You can have a choice board that you can make on your refrigerator or your pantry so that when your child does want something and their words are not reliable or their words are not present as of yet, then they can have the pictures to point to what they want, right? And sometimes even having the picture helps with that motor planning word finding, right? They know what they want. They just can't always get it out. I will share a quick story in terms of there was an adult that I just started working with, or there is an adult that I just started working with who just got her diagnosis. Thankfully, she's been misdiagnosed for 19 years. Well, let's say 15 years. And one of the things that I remember in discussing, having a meeting with her parents before, and then working with her, I remember her father saying, you know, I don't understand. I ask her a question and she doesn't answer. Right? I ask her a question and she doesn't answer. She's been like that since she was a little girl, but I know that she can talk. Right? And so it's frustrating, right? Is she being defiant? Is she not understanding the question? Not really sure what's going on all of these years. Then I speak to the girl. Well, she's a young lady, young woman who is autistic. And she said, without knowing what Dad said, you know, when I was a little girl, I used to get in trouble because I wouldn't answer my parents. And she said, I knew what I wanted to say. I just couldn't get it out. My brain was saying, but I couldn't get it out. Right? And that's that part where we have to understand a lot of autistic individuals don't have access to their words. They just don't have access to their words. And they know what they want to say. Your kiddo's looking at you, and sometimes you can see, right, they're trying to move their mouth or they're really frustrated. So what we have to do for those times when we don't have words or we don't have access to verbal words, we need to provide another method of communication for our kids. And pictures are a great place to start. For some little children, I can say you can use objects. So in terms of, you know, your kiddo asking for something to drink or something to eat, you can use like a small cup, right? And put that on a Velcro choice board for them to indicate that they're thirsty, or an empty water bottle. I should do a video on that. I should really do a video on using object schedules and communication choice boards. All right, idea. Sorry, it's the way my brain works. All right, so getting back to the objects and the visuals, right, and the pictures. If you have a choice board, which is a great place to start, a choice board will give you the opportunity to create that practice time in regards to communication, right? And it'll give your kiddo a chance to say what they really want, right? Whether they kind of move towards it, whether they point to it, whether they grab it. I have a YouTube video where I say you don't even need to print to make a choice board. You can actually cut out the pictures of your kiddo's favorite snacks from the boxes, put them in Ziploc bags, tape them on the pantry, automatic choice board. In fact, if you go to my YouTube channel, Everything Autism, I have a demonstration of that. So we don't have to wait, right, for something to be printed. But the idea is that we want to make sure our kiddos have a way to communicate their choices and what they want. So visuals are really, really great for that. Another really handy way to help your kiddo communicate is simply technology, right? There are, and I'll see if I can pull up one of the apps, but there are so many applications that you can download that your child can actually use to communicate or make a choice, or they can even use it to practice words, right? Sometimes we feel like when they're not using it to make a sentence, they're not understanding. Just like all kids babble verbally, children who use a device are babbling on their device. Concept, right? Practicing the words. Ooh, how does this sound? Oh, what does that say, right? What category is that in? our kids are taking everything in. So I encourage you to explore using devices, right? And I'll just do one here. This is a simple one. It's free. It's an awesome app. In fact, this company, Lico, actually has, and I'll put maybe a link in the comments after the course ends, or the recording ends. But it is, their company has some really good apps. So something simple, right? Like, I want drink, and I think I have my volume off for the recording.
I want drink.
I don't know if you can hear it. Let me turn it up a little bit. All right. So the child would put that in there and then press.
I want drink.
And then when they're done, they erase it, right? Or sometimes you can say,
What?
What? And there's a way to go to do you want. What do you want, right? There's somewhere in here. Sorry about that. But this is a really great app. Let me go to my history, and I think I have, you can ask how much, they can use it.
Milk.
How much milk do you need?
I want.
So there's different things that your kiddo can use, and there are also tips on how to use technology if that's going to be your child's method of communication. I guess what I want you to understand is that it's never too early to introduce AAC devices, and I also think that it is a great idea to even just explore it, right? Just to give your kiddo a method of asking and requesting when you're on the go. You can explore it when you're at home, but when you don't have your pictures, if that really works for your kiddo. So what I'm trying to help everyone understand is that even if verbal communication is not there, verbal speech is not there, we really need to make sure that communication is also in place as early as possible. And I'll talk about that later in the course. But it's important for us to think about how we can give our children a way to communicate what they want. Because pretty much when they're children, right, when they're little, what do you want? Food, toy, outside, mom, dad, not much, right? iPad. That's pretty much what they want. And children usually just come to you when they want something, right? Whether they want engagement or they need something from you. Other than that, they're pretty content on their own. So thinking in terms of that communication, you can look at pictures, you can use a technology, you can use objects. The idea is that you sign language, right? More. Do you want more cookies? Great thing to teach your child. I know there's a lot of controversy about I want and more, and I think some people just kind of get stuck on doing that for too long. So you do need to vary it, but that's another webinar. What I think I want you to think about in terms of when you are frustrated, when your child is frustrated, and that verbal communication is not coming soon enough, right? Quick enough for them. Put another method of communication in place. Make communication a priority, because it is a priority for your child. It's a priority for social engagement. It's a priority for you and your child to engage, to laugh, to share things. It's important. It's important for your child to be able to tell you things, right? In terms of if they're hurt. I know some kiddos don't recognize it, but it is so important for our children to even have a way to communicate no. And no is a powerful word. I know that we don't like it when anyone says no to us, right? But children have a right to say no. It's a very powerful word, and it keeps them safe. And that's what I want all parents to understand. No keeps people safe. For sensory safeness for autistic kiddos, but other kiddos just trying to avoid something that's uncomfortable. I'm not saying that when children say no and you tell them to clean their room or go to the bathroom that they get to get out of that. I'm saying it's a powerful word, and we don't want that to go away, because the reality is that our children are not always with us. They are often, at school for hours or daycare or with other people, and we want them to know that they can protect themselves and say no for whatever reason, right? I'm not talking about defiance of completing their chores. All right, so thinking about how your child already communicates. Using gestures. A lot of times parents will tell me their child takes their hand and brings it to the object, right? They'll bring their parent to the pantry or the refrigerator. Parent opens it because the parent understands that they're asking for something, and then they go in and they reach and they get it, right? Wonderful coping strategy, right? Love that. Parent and child understand one another. But our kids are going to go out into the world, right? They're going to be with other people, and they have more to say. And when I say, I mean communicate, right? They have more to communicate. So we want to start building on that. If your child brings you to something and goes to something and points to something, that's wonderful, because that means your child understands the power of communication. They understand that I have to communicate in some way to this person to get what I need. Very important, because once they understand that power of communication, now we can start implementing opportunities for them to communicate, right? Opportunities, using those alternative methods, right? Whether it's pictures or sign language or technology or objects. We want to make sure that our kids have a method of communication that doesn't necessarily always include the person's hand, right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's a great start. We know they want to say more, and as they expand their language repertoire, then they're actually going to have more to say and more to protest. And the other thing I wanted to just point out to parents is a lot of times we feel that our non-speaking children don't understand, or they do understand, but they don't have the vocabulary, and we need to build the vocabulary. Our children do have the vocabulary. They're filing everything they hear. They're filing things when they watch YouTube. They're filing information from iPad activities. They're putting everything in these little file folders right in their brain. They just need to have supports in place to be able to coordinate and access that information. Our children know way more than we think that they do. We just have to give them a way to communicate so they can show what they know. That's it. They do know. And you as parents know that your children know. I know it's frustrating sometimes because they're not able to tell us. So speaking of not able to tell us, let's talk about non-speaking, right? Now that we understand the difference between speech and communication, right? Speech is that verbal communication, that verbalization of words, babbling. Communication is actually communicating, right? Exchanging of information, requesting something. And so that is where that can look different. It can be verbal, it can use pictures, you can have technology, sign language. So now that we know the difference between that, let's talk about what is this non-speaking about, right? Non-verbal, non-speaking, terminologies change. And if we think about what people perceive when someone says non-speaking or non-verbal, because you hear a lot, parents will say, oh, my child's non-speaking. So they assume, or the school assumes, that their child doesn't know. But they do know. We just need to get a method of communication. So non-speaking is not associated with intellect. Non-speaking is not associated with lack of vocabulary. Non-speaking is not associated with not knowing or not having anything to say. Non-speaking is simply, at that time, for this moment, for that individual, they don't have the capability to access their verbal communication. And sometimes it's for different reasons. It could be apraxia, and your child's speech therapist should be able to help you determine that. Sometimes it is motor planning. Sometimes it's sensory regulation. Sometimes it's a combination of things. But if we help to provide an alternative method of communication for our children, then a lot of times that fosters that verbal communication for children who have the physical motor capability to do that, right? Because there are individuals who do have apraxia or motor planning that kind of really gets in the way of verbal communication being the primary method. So that's why technology is wonderful. We have wonderful AAC devices, assistive communication devices, that are available and doesn't prevent anyone from going to college and getting a job, just like sign language. It's just a different way of communicating. So when you have a child that is non-speaking, one of the things I want you to think about as a parent is make sure you check in with your kiddo. Make sure you acknowledge and say, hi, ooh, I sure do like the way you're lining up those cars. Acknowledge them when they are in their space and it appears that they're not interested in communicating with you. And I know it is really hard. It's difficult because you're not getting something back all the time, or you don't feel like you're getting something back because you're not getting that verbalization. But your child is aware of when you are communicating to them. They're aware of when you're not communicating to them. And it's very easy for us to get sort of complacent and, oh, they just play for hours on their iPad, right? Because they're not wanting to socially engage, or they're not willing to socially engage, or they can't socially engage, or they prefer to do something else. We have to still communicate to our children. And a lot of times on my videos or when I go into sessions with kiddos, I feel like I'm talking to myself because I'm talking and I'm not getting anything back, right? But then I start getting things back, and I start getting more back. And that's because the child knows that I am aware that they are here, that they are with me. And so what I'd like for you to do, those of you who have kids who are emerging verbal speakers or emerging communicators or non-speaking kiddos, reach out to them, right? Say something, acknowledge, even if you don't get something back. Know that they are watching, listening, and they're aware. They really are. And I know it's hard. We have lots of things to do. So I want to encourage you to do that. And like I said, just make a simple comment, right? Even if they're eating their snack and you say, ooh, I see how you love chocolate cookies. Those are your favorite. Don't follow it with, are those your favorite? You just said they were the favorite. They know that you know it's their favorite. These are the little tips that help parents communicate with their kiddos. Don't ask a lot of questions. They get enough questions in therapy and school. And also, that's not how we communicate. Sometimes questions are interjected in our communication exchange, but most times they're not. We go back and forth. So try, I know it's hard because we're always checking for information, checking for knowledge. Try to avoid asking your child a lot of questions, especially questions, and I apologize, there's construction going on downstairs if it's in the background for you. Sometimes our kiddos are just lost my train of thought. I'm trying to filter. All right, it will come back to me. This is live. This is what we get, right? Interference. I don't have a cat walking across the desk or a toddler or a naked person in the background, but I do have drilling that's totally thrown my thought process off. It will come back, but what I want you to think about is making sure that you engage, comment, recognize and notice your kiddo when they're in the room, right? Even if they don't give something back. See, it came back. All right, the other part is, even if you are in the car, going on a walk, riding your bikes or scooters, you don't have to ask questions or feel that there has to be a back and forth with a non-speaking communicator or non-speaking kiddo for you to feel like there's an exchange. You can comment on things like, ooh, that is a really tall tree. Look how wide that tree is. I love trees. Or you can tell a story about a tree. Your child is taking it in. Even if they do not acknowledge or appear to look at you, I guarantee you they are taking it in. You don't have to do long-winded comments, right? But you can comment on things. And the other thing I like about when parents are walking or, doing scooter rides outside is or even sensory activities, right? If you're making and creating Play-Doh, it's really good to comment on things you're doing to build vocabulary, right? That's another way to build vocabulary, is simply, let's say that you're mixing Play-Doh, right? And you're playing in Play-Doh or you're making cloud dough. You can talk about things like, ooh, I'm gonna pour it in slowly. Or you can say, ooh, I like how the Play-Doh is so mushy. It's really squishy in my hands, right? Lots of just saying and commenting. Because when you model communication, when you model words, that's how our children pick up vocabulary in context. Looking at a bunch of flashcards doesn't build vocabulary for communication. We learn to communicate based on our environment, right? And I'll share to help you understand that. If I think of, flashcards or standardized tests or, I don't know, games or things on the internet or iPad things, there are words that are not in my community cultural repertoire, right? I remember when my cousins came, I'm from Louisiana, and I remember when my cousins came to visit one summer and they kept asking for a pop. I didn't know what that was, right? That was not in my vocabulary because it wasn't necessary. We didn't use pop to say soda, we called it a soda or a Coke. So thinking in terms of loading a bunch of words with flashcards does not give the ability to communicate. It just gives a bunch of words, right? But immersing yourself, commenting on things, using adjectives and adverbs, and running fast. Ooh, mommy's going to cook dinner really fast so that we can eat. All of those things your child is taking in, building that vocabulary. So I say this to remind you that non-speaking does not mean your child is not listening. Non-speaking doesn't mean your child's not taking in information, even when they're zing, zing, zinging, jumping, jumping, jumping. When they're jumping and zinging, they're actually more sensory regulated, so they're taking in more. That's why kids need to move in the classroom. They can learn better when they're moving. That's why we need to get rid of sitting so much, way too much sitting. Children need to move their bodies. And the other thing, I guess, that I really want you to understand when it comes to the non-speaking is please remember your child can hear everything you say about them. Everything you say. When they're in the room and you're talking about them to the other parent or the therapist, they're listening. They hear you say, she can't. They hear you say, I don't want to, or they don't want to. They hear you say, they're just lazy, they're not trying. They don't want to, right? Because you're learning, right? They hear that, and they hear it over and over and over again. And so that kind of weighs on kiddos. So make sure that when you are around your kiddos who are non-speaking, non-verbal, not really communicating or engaging a lot, they are listening and they hear what you say. There is a quote from a book called Sincerely Your Autistic Child. I recommend it. It is an amazing book. It is an anthology written by several autistic individuals saying things to their parents that they couldn't say when they were children, what they want them to know. And one of them is, I heard you say that I couldn't. I heard you say that I won't. I heard you say that I'm lazy and I'm just defiant. I heard you say that, and it really hurt me, right? And then I didn't believe in myself. So please remember, our non-speaking individuals may not be saying anything, but they're listening, even when they're moving. All right. So now that we understand what speech is, what communication is what? A priority. It's a priority. And it can be different. It can look different for each individual. Some individuals use multiple methods of communication. And now that we know that non-speaking individuals can communicate just with supports in place, and those supports look different for each individual. I love technology option, but spelling boards and pictures are great as well. And now that we know our non-speaking kiddos are building their vocabulary when we talk to them, even if they don't say anything back or even look at you or acknowledge you. You don't need eye contact to communicate. Blind people communicate just fine without eye contact. Remember that. Communication is not about eye contact. It's just something that some people prefer. It's not necessary. And for some individuals, autistic individuals, communicating with forced eye contact just doesn't work. Doesn't work at all. So allow your child to do their eye contact on their own. That's their different way of communicating, and we just have to accept that so that they can have their needs supported. But now that we know we're building that vocabulary with our non-speaking individuals, and we know that there are different methods that we can introduce, when do we start? When do we start? When do we start? That's the question I hear often. The other question I hear is it too late? No, it's never too late. It's never too late. It's just harder when children are older because they've established other means of communicating that probably aren't the best or don't translate or generalize. So that limits them. But it's never too late and it's never too early. Start now. Alternative method while they're building verbal. And if verbal is not going to be their primary method, then they have a method in place. That is making communication a priority. Do not let a speech therapist tell you, or any therapist actually, tell you that your child is not ready to start communicating. Don't let anyone tell you that your child is not ready to start exploring an AAC device app, assistive technology, on the iPad or a large phone. Don't let anyone tell you that pictures will prevent your child from becoming verbal. First of all, not true. Like even research-based, evidence-based fact. However, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense. So if I have the ability to text someone and I'm sitting across the table from them, why would I text them if I could verbalize? I don't think that I would do that, because if you can verbalize at that moment, more than likely that's the method you would use. Unless you're cross with your spouse and maybe texting sometimes it keeps you from saying things you don't want to say. However, I'm thinking of like arguing via text when you're in the same space. So back to what we're here for with our kiddos. That's the way my brain works. Thinking in terms of when someone tells you your child is not ready to develop a method of communication. I mean, it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't make sense. It makes no sense. Everyone has a right as a human to communicate, but our children communicate when they come out of the womb. They're already communicating. They're crying. They're turning over. They're screaming. They're laughing. They're looking at you. They're looking away from you. They're frowning. They're making facial expressions. We come out communicating. However, when we're not able to develop the communication that's being used in our environment, and I say that because if you are a hearing person born into a deaf family, you have to learn that language along with verbal communication, right? Because you have to learn the language that your family uses so you can communicate with them, and then learn the communication that you will communicate with others who are verbal communicators as well. And maybe that was a little too over-explaining, but my point is we all are born into whatever environment communication method is being used. If a child needs something different, we have to provide that. It's important to provide that. And it's important to provide it now, yesterday, last week. What are we waiting for? It needs to be a priority. Now, there are other things that we need to support, right? Make sure the sensory needs are being met, right? I know a lot of people say, well, their behaviors, they can't, they're not ready, their behaviors, they can't sit. Stop. Do you know why they have those behaviors? Because they have no way to communicate. It is frustrating. It's frustrating for you as a parent. It's really frustrating for your kiddo. Every day, all day, they have no way to communicate. So we want to provide that, right? Just looks different. And we want to do it right away. Now, I'm going to talk next week. Our course is going to be about sensory, and I will talk about that, right? So you'll have some strategies around how do I make sure my child's sensory needs are being met so they can develop that communication, right? So thinking in terms of we come out communicating from day one. What do children do when they come out? They cry, spank. They used to spank the baby so they could cry and take that first breath. That was the theme. But I'm sure the kids are crying and screaming because it's cold outside. They were nice and cozy, and now it's not comfortable, right? So communication, right? Communicating. Our children do this from the very beginning. So when someone says they're not ready to develop a method of communication because they need to do this, this, and this first, you tell them they've been communicating since the day they're born. They were born. We just need to find a way that works for them now, right? What works for them now? What supports do they need? And so with that said, that's for little kids, right? Early diagnosis, new diagnosis, non-speaking, or minimally speaking, but still kind of working out communication, right? So thinking in terms of you want to start ASAP. Is it too late, right? When someone is past 10, past 8, past 5. Now, who knows in terms of motor planning and verbal, whether or not, I'm sure there's maybe some research out there, right, in terms of developing, but typically the older kids get, the harder it is to teach a different method, right? Because they're going to find ways to communicate, whether it's throwing a chair, kicking, screaming, biting, whether it is walking away, whether it is not wanting to engage, they are communicating, right? Just not in ways that we always clearly understand, or maybe ways that are not the safest or the most appropriate, right? Kicking is a form of communication. Pushing is a form of communication. When you push someone, you want them to get away. That's what you're communicating. Get away, right? That is communicating. That's what that is. So if they don't have another way to communicate that, when they need someone to get away, and sometimes our children need someone to get away, and it's usually because of sensory overload, or they don't feel safe. So we have to give them a way to communicate that so that it's not done through pushing, right? And that looks different for every kiddo. Like I said, pictures, sign language, technology. We have to support our kids' needs, and we have to work on that. If a child is older, a lot of times it's really a good time to introduce some sort of technology device. It can be low level, high level. It can be, some of our kids are older, and amazingly they actually type right there online. They're just non-speaking. And lo and behold, you get them the right text to talk, and they're communicating. It's amazing. But I will share a story because I love to share stories, and I don't know if I've shared a story yet, maybe one. So I just started working with a grandmother of a 19-year-old, and this 19-year-old autistic young man had no method of communication in place. 19. Lots of trauma from behavior modification therapy and intervention and strategies. Why? Because he had no other way to communicate. No one had provided him with a method of communication. And he is not intellectually delayed. In fact, we found out he's actually brilliant. We knew, but now we know. Well, we know because he was able to communicate that to us. So this young man, we introduced a basic technology. I think we introduced Sonaflex on the phone. And let's try it out. Let's see how he responds. Amazing. Started communicating. I said, let's step it up a notch. Let's go to the new Pro-Lo-Quo, and they have a Pro-Lo-Quo coach, wonderful AAC app, now an affordable price range for parents, and they also offer a 30-day free trial, which is wonderful, right? So you can try out this AAC device if that is the device that would work for your child. Like I said, there's so many free ones you can try. Ask your speech therapist. You can explore things. But this 19-year-old has been sharing information with his grandmother that she didn't even know that he knew. And it's amazing. It's like she's actually starting to get to know him after all these years because he had no way to communicate. None. I have a mom in Australia. Her son is 14, I believe, and he's been using a device, but as he got older, he has more to say. So he's been using his device efficiently, and he's been really frustrated, right? And we were like, oh, it's puberty, but oh, there's something else, right? So we said, let's explore a higher level tech, high level, higher tech, whatever the terminology is, sorry. Let's try a different app, right? A different communication device. So we introduced something that he could type because we realized that he was typing. Guess what? He was able to demonstrate that he was aware of the capital of Australia. His paperwork over all the years says he's intellectually delayed. We know that he is not, but that's what his paperwork says because he's non-speaking and the assessment is based on speakers. Now he had an assessment, and of course now his legitimate intellect is demonstrated because he has this new device and he can communicate and share what he knows. So what he said, and it was just amazing, enlightening, and like blew us all away because we didn't know. And why didn't we know? Because he needed a different method of communication. He said, "Are there any other boys like me?" Whoa. Then he said, "I want to go to school and be a scientist. I want to find fossils." Yeah, that's what he said. And, you know, we think our children are not aware that they're different. We think that we don't want to talk about the autistic identity. We think our children are not aware, and they are aware. And he said, "Are there any other children like me?" That's important, right? That's important to him. It may not be important to everyone, but it's important to him. Didn't know that. Now we know. So I say it is never too early and it is never too late to start communication methods that are different from verbal while you build verbal, whether they're going to be verbal communicators or not. Because communication needs to be a priority. It is very important and it is critical. If our children have no way to communicate, not only can they not tell us what they know, what's going on, they can't tell us if someone's done something wrong, but they also can't push back on things. They can't share their ideas. They can't tell you what they want to do. They can't make a joke. One of the parents in one of the Facebook groups, her daughter is just that device she used, I think she uses, I can't remember which one she uses, but she uses an AAC device and she communicates and she's sassy like her mama on that device. And her mom has customized some of the words. You know, she doesn't go get her hair done, she gets her hair did, because that's what they say. And so that is where we have to remember communication is about connections with the people in our environment. It's not about a test or an assessment that says these are the words we're all supposed to know. No. Communication is an exchange of ideas. It's an exchange of, you know, emotions. It's letting people know what you want and what you need and what you don't want, right? All right. So now we know speech versus communication. We understand non-speaking does not mean we cannot communicate in other ways. We know that we can start communication early. We know that it's never too late, right? To explore options. Now, what can you do at home as parents? What can you do at home? The first thing you can do at home, I will say, is shift your mindset, if you need to, around accepting that your child may have to communicate differently now. They may have to communicate differently later. They may have to communicate in more than one way. Or they may not communicate as much, but they may be able to communicate, right? Not everybody wants to have a long conversation like Stacy. So thinking in terms with shifting your mindset around accepting and saying, I'm going to find a way for my child to communicate. I'm going to make it a priority because right now verbal is not reliable. And even if verbal is ongoing, right? You can still support in little ways, because our kids have a lot to say. They have a lot to communicate. They really do. Just have to give them a way to do that. So thinking in terms of, let's look at if your child is emerging verbal communicator or a verbal communicator and just working out some kinks of organizing and figuring some things out, right? What you can do at home is you can make opportunities for your child to communicate, right? You have to create those opportunities. And so one of the ways that you can create opportunities, and this is for other methods as well, but especially when it comes to kids who are, really working hard to verbalize, pushing through, discombobulated verbalizations to get their point across. They really, really, really are practicing on their own initiative that verbal communication. So for those kids, you have to give them opportunities to practice. And what happens is, as parents, right, naturally we're kind of in charge of everything. So we're in charge of when you eat. We're in charge of when you go to the bathroom, when you go out. We're in charge of everything. So typically, our kids don't have to come to us because we provide things, right? So when we think about things like snacks, right? Like I said, what do kids want? Snacks, toys. I mean, maybe snacks, toys. Right? So instead of having the iPad on the table, accessible, limit the access so that they have to ask you for it because it's up high. Yes, I know some children will stack chairs and climb. Some children are highly motivated and very creative. But that level of problem solving is a sign of high intelligence as well. You just have to hang in there as parents. All right, so thinking in terms of limiting access. I'll share a really simple story. Mom kept complaining about her daughter going and eating Doritos. And I said, well, where are the Doritos? I've told her she can't have them. Daughter, I think, was 4. And so, where are the Doritos? And she said, oh, they're in the snack cabinet. Okay, so where's the snack cabinet? Well, the snack cabinet is at the bottom, right at level with a 4-year-old, right? Ah, look at that. Free pickings, all the Doritos I can eat. So first, in order to get rid of that horrible behavior, right? Because this is coming from, oh my gosh, they won't stop, they're not listening. No, we just need to structure the environment so they don't have access to the Doritos, right? Put them away. Put them up high. If you need to, put them in a box that they can't open. Put it somewhere where they either have to ask you for it or they just can't get it, right? So that nips that behavior. I know we're not here for behavior, but got to throw it in because it's all intertwined. But while she was nipping that behavior under control, as my grandma would say, she was also creating an opportunity for her daughter to have to come to her and communicate, to have to use her picture cards, right? So we have to remember our children need to practice communication. And the only way for them to practice communication is to create opportunities. Go for walks. Comment on things you see. Play silly board games. Go outside and throw water balloons, right? Do silly things. Do sensory activities. We'll talk about that next week. The concept is that you have to create opportunities for children, especially kids who are verbally pushing out words and it's all discombobulated. If we don't have opportunities for them to communicate and practice, then it's going to take longer, right? Now, for those kids who are non-speaking, who are working on alternative assistive communication methods, same thing, but you have to create more opportunities with intent. And sometimes a little bit of structure, but not too much because you want it to be naturalistic. But you have to parent with intent and consciously think about, did I give 3 opportunities before lunch for my child to use their device? Did I give 3 opportunities today for them to use their choice board? You have to set goals for yourself to remind you, right? One of my moms, she sets alarm on her phone for, I think it's it's not all day. I think like within a certain time period on Saturdays, she has her phone go off every 20 minutes for, between, I guess, breakfast and lunch. I think that's what it is. But her phone goes off and reminds her, let me create an opportunity for my child to practice communication. Again, let me create an opportunity for my child to practice communication. Not sit at a table, not sitting, not doing things. Exactly, Shamir. That's not the same as withholding. It's creating those opportunities. You're not telling them, you can't have it until you say the word Dorito, right? Thank you, Shamir. You are setting up the environment. You are structuring situations with the intent of creating opportunities for them to have to communicate. Because if they can just have access to their iPad, they know the passwords, they got chips, they don't ever have to say a word to you. Not one. Don't have to, right? So thinking in terms of starting the communication at home, things you can do at home, you can easily start with implementing simple visuals. Remember, you can cut out the boxes and make a choice board, but what's important is you need to start with creating opportunities to practice what method you're sort of introducing. The other thing is that at home, you can also, if there is another child in the home, one of the things I like to do is I like to give the siblings something to do to facilitate communication and engagement. Because a lot of times our kiddos will engage more with their peers than they will with us, or you'll hear them talk more or attempt communication, or even their device. You know, I have a kiddo that he will bring his device when he and his siblings sit and play games, but will not bring it, right, when he's sitting at the table with his mom. Now, I don't know if that means he doesn't want to talk to his mom, but I'm sure that he and his sibling just have more kid-friendly, engaging conversations. So thinking in terms of if you have siblings, right, you can also use that scenario for turn taking, right? Turn taking is a part of communication. And so turn taking is something that we want to learn in a naturalistic environment, right? And you know, sadly, we live in a world now where we're all on our technology. We are all in a device. We're all looking at something, and we're not really engaging, right? And sometimes we don't even have to, even at the stores now, right? You go somewhere and you have to go to the device to order, and people are standing behind the registers. Children don't play board games as much anymore, if they do at all, because everything is technology based. But if we think about all the things, my generation, I'm older, I'm sure, than most of people, maybe not, but we played outside, we played board games, and we had to take turns. And one of the things that we had to learn about turn taking, because our parents were not around, parents were not helicopter hovering, right? We're just outdoors. Even when we were in the room playing with our siblings, right? Your parents weren't sitting there with you. So you learn turn taking, and some of us learn turn taking skills the hard way, right? Your sibling pinched you or pushed back on you, because some of us have those siblings. Or you just learn by default, right? You learn to make adjustments. So all of those things we used to do, playing kickball outside, Red Rover, which they've taken that away, dodgeball, you know, Scrabble, Monopoly, Chutes and Ladders, all those things I encourage parents, bring back simple board games. That teaches turn taking, and turn taking is communication. I say something, you say something. I say something based off what you said. Turn taking is most generalized when it is taught in a naturalistic environment, not at a therapy table, right? So create opportunities for you to practice turn taking, doing fun, silly stuff. You can do turn taking even if you're doing a rice spin, right? If you're playing in the rice spin with your kiddo, and you can say, ooh, scoop it with a cup and say, it's my turn to pour, your turn to pour, right? Turn taking, social engagement. So turn taking is a very important skill for communication, and you can do those things at home. You can facilitate that by creating opportunities for your child to practice. Making things together, right? Baking cookies. If your kiddo likes to be in the kitchen with you, take turns scooping and pouring in ingredients. Take turns flipping the page when you're reading a book together for those kids that like to read. Those are things that you can do at home to teach the foundations around the communication that you're building with either the verbal or another alternative method, right? You have to remember communication is not just one layer, right? Lots of things in place. So we don't want to wait, right, till they're sitting for 15 minutes. We want to immerse them in a in an environment that gives them opportunities to practice communicating, but also gives you an opportunity as a parent to work out the glitches and see what really works for your kiddo, right? And that can point you in the right direction with the child speech therapist to figure out what method of communication would be best for your kiddo. It's, you know, when I think about immersing children in an environment that's communicating, I guess I really need to make sure that I'm also saying it doesn't have to be nonstop. We have to give our children time alone. We have to give our children time to process. We have to give our children time to re-regulate, and sometimes that means not talking and engaging with others. So that's why we want to intentionally create opportunities, just little small, 5 minutes here and there, 10 minutes here and there, right? Doesn't have to be this long, oh, I work with my child for 3 hours. Oh my gosh, I'm exhausted and so is the kid, right? It's exhausting. Like, most of us don't want to socially engage for 3 hours with someone, the same person. Well, maybe, I don't know, but it's a lot, right? It's a lot for a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old. So consider creating those opportunities within the naturalistic environment. But remember, you've got to give your child time to process. Remember that time to process. A lot of autistic kiddos process later, right? They take it in, they process it later. You hear what they said at school come out later. I hear what happened at home later, right? And remember when I said they're taking everything in? When they start communicating, they tell a lot of stuff at school that goes on at home that you think your non-speaking child is not picking up. So remember, they hear what you're saying. All right. The other things that you can do at home. So we talked about, you know, creating those opportunities. We talked about turn taking. One of the things that I encourage parents to do, and this is about home, but it's also about the family, community, friend circle that your child is within. So in order for your child to build on that communication method that you're trying out, or you've decided this really works for them, in order for them to create more, to have more opportunities to communicate and generalize outside of mom or dad, we have to have other people doing the same thing. Now, with family, gets a little tricky, right? Grandmas, oh, he just don't want to say. I understand. Nothing wrong with that. I get it. Aunt Bessie, I'm going to get that child some cookies. Everybody wants to please the child, or they just say they're not, right? I get it. Family just gets in our faces, and our friends sometimes don't understand. So I tell parents, and I think I might have talked about this in the course last week, you need to find at least one person, whether it's a friend or a family member, that's going to jump on board with you and the strategies you're implementing for your child's communication to develop. And you need to help them implement those naturalistic things, right? For example, when we say as a parent to our child, how old are you? What's your name? And our children don't respond. Do you know why they don't respond? It could be because they don't have access to their words. It could be because they just don't care. But most of the time, it's because you already know the answer. And autistic individuals are very concrete thinkers. And so why would I answer a question that I've already answered 20 times and my mom already knows how old I am and my name? I get it. You're checking for, do they know, right? I get it. I get the need to check for do they know. That's where that friend or family member comes in. Now, gets a little tricky with name and age because sometimes the other person knows that. But you get folks to ask your children questions that are more naturalistic questions coming from someone else. And that can sometimes help with that generalization, but it also gets you as the parent to feel comfortable that, check, okay, they do know their name, right? But I will tell you, your child knows their name. Even if they're not responding to their name, they know who they are, they know their name. They're just hyper-focused on something else. Or the reality of it is, and I know it's hard to hear because we think our children love us so dearly, sometimes our children just don't want to be bothered with us. Like, they really don't always want us to be there. Some kids do, Some kids don't. So we got to respect that, right? Give them a little time and a little space that sometimes they're just not interested. But I understand the need to want to know, but I will say if your child has answered the question more than once, even if they've answered it one time, they know. They really know. You know, we don't need to keep asking our children the same questions over and over again to check to see if they knew it. I mean, when you took your final exam and you made an A, do you want to keep taking it again to prove that you really made the A? No. So don't keep asking the same questions or question after question after question, checking, right? Communication is not an assessment. It's an exchange of ideas, comments, or needs and wants, right? Kids don't want questions. They usually will back away. You know, if they know, they see that person coming who's always asking questions, like, oh, not coming to them, oh, not sitting next to them, going away, right? So thinking about when you are talking to your child, and I know I was talking about family members and I went to questions. Once again, that's how my brain works on a Sunday morning after 2 cups of coffee. Lots of ideas that I want to get to everyone. I did want to do a PowerPoint today because communication, I want to communicate to you, right? And this is my way of connecting. So thinking in terms of, I'm going to go back to the family and then I'll go to the question. The family member or the friend, that's the person that, one, you want to support so that your child can have other opportunities with people besides yourself as a parent to practice communication, right? And the other thing is kids respond differently to other people than they do to parents. But one of the bonuses of getting one person on your sort of like side of supporting you and what you've decided for your child in regards to building their communication skills is when people see you have somebody that jumped on board, you guys are both confident in what you're doing, your child is just growing in their communication skills, other people will follow. They will follow. And then you end up having that support team for your child. Not everybody's going to follow, so just expect some people are not going to follow, right? Some people follow sooner than others, some people never follow. But if you can get one person and then you get another person and then you really just build on that, it really makes a difference. And I know that we are, I have it scheduled for 90 minutes just because it gives a little leeway for technology issues or people who want to pop in later and ask questions. But I know we're kind of coming close to time. I've given a lot of information. I want to, my last point, I think, in terms of what you can do at home, because there's so many things you can do at home. And a lot of that is individualized, right, when it comes to communication. But there are things that are across the board that can really help. And limiting the amount of questions you ask your child is so helpful. And the reason it's helpful is because, one, you build trust that when your child comes to you or you come to them, there's not going to be a demand of them finding an answer, making a choice, having to decide. For some kids, that's a lot of work. So when you are always coming to them with a question and always sort of checking for knowledge, you don't really build a good, it's not a good first date, right? Not a good second date, right? Not really sure I want to come on that third date with my parent because they're always asking me questions. Just enjoy the moment, relish in the moment, talk about the things you're doing. I know it's going to feel like you're talking to yourself. I do it all the time. I know I'm a communicator and a talker, and I don't always need someone to talk back to me, but your child needs you to be their parent, not their therapist, not their teacher, not their assessment evaluator. They need you to just share. Talk about the blue Play-Doh. Ooh, it smells stinky. Ooh, it smells salty. Lick it. It tastes salty, right? Silly things. I know everybody's not silly. Kids love silly. Get the other parent who's silly to do those things with them, right? You don't have to do it all. That's one last tip. If you're not capable of doing some of the strategies or implementing them naturalistically, the other parent can, right? Or you guys decide who's going to be in charge of making sure we create opportunities. Who is going to create opportunities for turn taking? Who's going to get a family member friend on board to grow the support system? Who's going to make sure and check the other person so we're not asking too many questions because it's just a habit, right? All of those things you want to think about, you want to consider, And I feel like I've said a lot. Just to sort of recap, now we know the difference between speech and communication. And now we know that communication is a priority today. So we know that non-speaking individuals are not intellectually delayed. That's something separate. We know that non-speaking individuals are taking in all the information and they are building their vocabulary. They're just not able to show what they know, which is why we have to provide an alternative method of communication while we're building verbal, if verbal is going to be their method, right? And when can we start that? ASAP. Not too early, not too young, not too old, right? Remember that, remember that. It takes time, right? I'm not saying it doesn't take time. It takes a lot of time. So you have to do the work at home. You have to do the work outside the home. You have to advocate. You have to make tough decisions and say, you know what? My child will not come here because you're not helping to support their communication. I had a mom, I will never forget, she told her mother, if you don't take the communication course with me, my son's not going to come to you unsupervised because I'm determined to build a communication system for him, and we all need to do this with him. All need to do this with him. So, you're going to have to stand your ground because we need to have communication in place for our children soon, later, when, now, right? Very important to make communication a priority. I'm going to end on that and stick around for a minute or two, just a minute or two in case anyone has any questions. I know that, we're trying to pick certain times. We may play around with an evening time. Next Sunday, I may switch it up a little bit and do sensory at night after the kids have gone to bed and see what that looks like. But I do know that a lot of folks are going to be able to watch the replay, and I appreciate everyone who's hung around for this hour plus time. I know it's a lot of time on a Sunday morning, but we really wanted to contribute something of value. We want Jacksonville Autistic Society is sponsoring this wonderful series for parents. And, it's going to be available on their webpage so that parents can learn and become empowered. Thank you, Shamir. Thanks, Michelle. And, I think that it's also, just talking while I'm sort of hanging out, I do think that it's also important for those of us, you're welcome, Michelle, for those of us who are on this journey, and where we are on the journey is different for everyone, but to reach out and help other parents who are maybe on a different part of the journey, right? And support them, because parents feel alone, right? When you are trying to develop a method of communication that looks different, or your child's communication is developing different, or people don't understand their method of communication, it can be really difficult. So just like that kiddo said, are there any other kids like me? As a parent, find those parents who have some similarities with your journey.